We are here tonight joined by Matthew Gravelyn. Thank you for being here. It's long overdue, like I said on Twitter. Uh, this is a thing that, and like legitimately, this is a thing that we've been talking about for probably over a year now and haven't actually gotten around to being like, hey, we should reach out to Matthew. So, thanks for being with us here in spite of how it should have happened forever ago.
It feels right now. Now is the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome. And
Oh,
welcome
Magnus.
everybody. It's good to see you here tonight. Um, we Before we get started tonight, I just want to let you know about a few things. First of all, Infinite Horizon. In case you haven't heard, our sci-fi ciphers superhero show is back. We are back with season 2. We just finished our second episode of the season, and it is now up on YouTube as of this afternoon. So you can go check that and all the rest of them out, as well as our season 1 recap. So if you didn't catch any of the first season, you can get totally caught up to the beginning of season 2 in about 15 minutes. It basically condenses the first season, which is like 90, close to 90 hours of game, down into 15 minutes.
Betting that was either a Herculean or a Sisyphusian effort,
You
depending on
know,
which.
it's really who knows at this point.
What a reference. That's the kind of show we do over here.
I've
Yeah.
been playing a lot of Hades lately, so
Yeah.
No, I know exactly where that came from.
So if you haven't seen any of that stuff yet, it's all available on YouTube and you can go check it out. And the next episode will be airing on this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, here on Rule of Lore. And that's really it. That's our announcements from now until we get more projects on our plate. Which nobody's in any rush to do. Um,
yes, you did make it. Welcome.
Welcome indeed. Hell yeah. So we can just get started. So Matthew, if you want to like tell people who you are, the kind of stuff that you do, and yeah, just
Yeah, for sure. I'm Matthew Gravelyn. I always want to say I'm a hobby game designer, and I've been told to stop doing that by other designers that I talk with. But yeah, I'm a game designer. I like writing small games, rules light games. I like storytelling and narrative focused games. I also like writing a lot of supplements. I did a lot of content for D&D. My latest project is Articles of the Arcana, which is a supplement for Troika. It's character and GM supplemental content that is all based around tarot. And John is helping me on that project. John's the editor on that project. We played that on stream at Friends Who Roll Dice on Wednesday, just a couple days ago, and actually hit our funding goal right at the tail end of that stream. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was
so
super cool.
yeah, I mean, I've had a migraine all day. This is like the first time I felt livable all day, and I'm wondering if that was just like a huge adrenaline like rush plus 4 hours staring at my monitor on stream, and then like I'm paying the price for it Friday morning, but yeah, so that's a little bit about me. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Matthew, and you can check out all my games on itch at mr-matthew.itch.io.
Awesome. Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about game design and about just sort of narrative gaming and all that kind of good stuff. So as is tradition here on Ramblemancy, I start off the episode by throwing John under the bus. John, what do you got for us?
So actually,
You'd think that it being tradition, it would stop working, but it doesn't. It works every time, and I love it.
Every single time at like 4:30 in the afternoon Central, I'm like, you know what? This time I'm gonna get Lucas back. I'm gonna think of a perfect intro. when he throws me under the bus, and every time I don't do it. So here we are.
Consistency.
But actually, I do have kind of an interesting thought, which is kind of prompted by the game that we played over on Friends for Roll Dice the other night, which is like ambiguity in game design, or like leaving things unsaid. Because and I don't know if there's a question in here so much as it is just a comment, but I really really love that, because I am who I am, when I'm just given a thing that's kind of weird and then told to do whatever I want with it. The example that I'm thinking of is my character was given, because it's in the art of the Fool card, an ever-living rose. And I'm not going to spoil what happened, because that was only a couple days ago, but I did something very interesting with it that it almost 100% was not intended for.
100% not intended.
So I think, anyway, that's more a comment than it is anything, but I think that's maybe one of my favorite like things in storytelling focused or like narrative focused games, is kind of just being given like something that has it's got like a name and maybe a detail that makes it kind of odd. And I think that's a really fun like design mechanic to jump off of as a player.
I mean, there doesn't need to be a question there. I have so many thoughts and feelings about that sentiment. And I think we can talk about it in the context of Articles of the Arcana, because that's one of the reasons I really gravitated to Troika. I only got into Troika a couple months ago. Like, I got it with the that big itch bundle that was out over the summer, the racial equality bundle. And it's just been sitting in my library for ages, along with the million other games that we all now have in our libraries on itch. And I remember a game design friend, Sean Richer, I mentioned it on Twitter. Sean does a lot of stuff around that kind of like that Troika, that kind of rules light, the indie, the kind of surrealist area. And I think he just one time mentioned Troika, and I'm like, hey, I have that. I could go read that. And I downloaded it, I put it on my iPad, and I read it in a night, and just was just like, oh, I see why this is an interesting setup, because I think it really exemplifies that kind of vagueness. So if you're not familiar with Troika, all Troika characters start with a few basic stats and a line of items, and then you choose a background, and that background augments it, and it gives you more items, and it gives you special abilities. It's literally a page. People have fit Troika backgrounds on a tarot card. So yeah, so the I'm going to say left, who knows if I'm right. So that side is all the rules for character creation. That's it. And then on the other side is an example of a background. And there's 36 of those in the book. There's tons of them that are in supplements. I have 36 in the book that we're working on. And that's it. That's your whole character. And so what John's talking about so all the characters in Articles of the Arcana, all the backgrounds are based on tarot cards. And the background that John chose to play was the Fool. And the Fool, so the art that we have was done by Brie Dedanen, and the Rider-Waite version is similar to her art, but the Fool is holding this rose. And in tarot, the rose can signify a lot of different things. There's kind of like a base. Here's what we think it means. Here's kind of the baseline, but that's the point of tarot, is it can mean whatever you want it to mean. So Troika, though, just says put some items here. So I just put an ever-living rose. That's the words I wrote. There is literally no mechanics for that. There is no dice rolls. There's no stat block. There is no reference in the book, mine or otherwise, that says, here's what an ever-living rose is or does. It doesn't have 1d6 uses that recharge after sundown. It does not have, whatever. It's just, I wrote 4 words or whatever on a piece of paper and gave it to John. And I think John did no less than 3 very interesting, very unique things with that rose that I had never planned for. And again, I just feel super validated in choosing to write for Troika. I feel very validated in my approach to playing it. And then the other, Brahm was playing the magician. And one of the things that you might see in a background is, for a background, is a random spell. And that's kind of like thrown in as like a little extra. Bram's background was 6 spells, all of them random. It is the laziest game design ever, and yet is the like it is. It's so lazy of me to do that, but like I chose to do that on purpose to fill it. Like it's all random. I think the magician has 1 actual skill and then 6 random spells that Bram actually went in, did, and rolled randomly on a table and got 6 spells and had a blast with them. And I think 3 times, maybe 2 or 3 times, those spells were critically important to our story. Our story was shaped by those random spells that he happened to roll. So, like, it feels bad. It feels wrong for me to take credit for any of that, but like, I did write those words in a page.
That's actually a really good kind of segue into a question that I actually had for you, because this is a question that sort of occupies a lot of my thought when it comes to game design, which is something that a question that I've considered much more frequently as I've moved away from D&D as like my primary tabletop role-playing game, right? Which is what goes, and so I'll ask this to you personally, but then I think the general question stands as well. But what goes into designing a game that more heavily emphasizes narrative gameplay rather than like a crunchy mechanical sort of thing, right? Like what do you think about? Like what kind aspects of the game do you think about when it goes into designing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think there's a lot of ways to answer that. I think kind of like the gut reaction one is that I think the human brain only has so much processing power. And if you're trying to remember rules and definitions and terms and tables and doing math in your head, that you just fundamentally don't have the extra space in there to do a whole lot else. And also, like, telling a story and doing dice math and tables, like, I mean, okay, like brains are weird and they're hard to catalog, but like those feel like fundamentally different processes. So like, how can I expect somebody to do both of those things? Like, I feel like, again, a gross overgeneralization of the world of tabletop role-playing games, but I feel like that's one binary or one spectrum that you're on, which is like very crunchy math, rules heavy, and very light narrative, prompts, vague, like improv. And games fall on that spectrum all over the place.
Right.
And, you know, absolutely no quality assessment made. Like, you're into whatever games you're into, but I'm over here on, like, I think this is the right side. This is like my fake spectrum where I said this is narrative. I'm definitely more over in here. The way I personally approach it is I say, we want to start with telling a story. That's always my goal. My games tell stories. That's the purpose of them. If you want to win, if you want to accomplish tasks, then you can do that in a lot of my stuff, but that's not the reason I started doing it. So I start with tell a story, and I add as many rules as I think are necessary to facilitate telling the story I want to be told. So, and there's a lot of different things. So like, I guess I'm most well known for Mall Kids. Like it was like my first game that I made. And it is really just kind of lifted from Honey Heist. You get the 2 stats, you kind of go back and forth between them. There's a tension between going too much one way or too much the other way. And then I said, okay, this is cool, but I also want to tell the story of a day in the mall. And those 2 mechanics don't do that. So what else do I need to do? So I added the times of day. And then I said, I want everybody to have equal opportunity to narrate. So now I said, okay, in each of those points of the day, every player takes turns doing one scene. And I said, okay, these are rules that may not strictly have been necessary to tell a story, but I felt the story that I wrote that game to tell a certain kind of story, and that was as many rules as I needed so that I could be sure that if I handed that to a player, they would understand how to tell the story I wanted to tell. Asterisks here, tell whatever story you want. Like, I think I said this on stream. I'm not precious about my games. If you want to get Mall Kids and do it completely differently, great. I don't like, it's not going to hurt my feelings if like you had fun in a way I didn't foresee, right?
That's
Like that's
what that specifically reminds me of is like Caitlin has told me stories before of how she's taken click from Weave and has
mm-hmm.
basically taken that. It's just like essentially for anybody who might not be aware is the playset for Weave that that Matthew wrote, which is sort of the high school RPG setting. And Caitlin has specifically told me many stories where she and her friends have taken that and have done like this weird paranormal kind of like thing that it goes into, which like there's nothing about that in the playset. So yeah, like that's
Yeah.
hmm.
Weave was like my first. I was actually just sorry. Quick side note. I was just telling John like I finally got my mall kids out. That right there is the first dollar I ever made from writing,
Oh
and
wow.
that was from
Oh,
writing Weave, writing Click for Weave. That was the first time I had ever been
that's
paid
cool.
to write. I'm still working on a frame for it, trying to find something that isn't like super duper
Yeah.
cheap and ugly and everything. But that's my first dollar I ever made from writing.
Oh,
So
that's so cool.
it's exceptionally important to me. And writing Click for Weave was such a formative experience for me because the way I kind of explained it, so Weave is also, oh gosh, I literally did not even occur to me that Weave is based on tarot also.
Yeah.
Like in concept, like it's full circle. Like I said, Click and Weave were extremely formative for me. So in the game of Weave, you choose a play set and that kind of skins it. Mine was like the high school hijinks. Yes, I write a lot of high school games. I have a lot of baggage. We'll unpack that at some other time. But when you write for Weave, you're basically giving building blocks. And the way I always try to describe it is you write around the story. You never actually write the story in Weave. The story is a random assortment of cards and dice rolls and player interpretations and how those players are feeling that day and what time of year it is and how their phone is behaving. It's like so many variables. So there's this black hole of a story and I'm just putting all these pieces around it that might go into making a story. And that's how Weave works. That's the system. But I took that kind of sentiment away and I said, that's kind of how I want to structure my games is I could sit down and write a story for you, which I have, like, there's Humblewood. We wrote a story for you. There's dozens and dozens of pages where you could just literally read the book and that's the adventure. And it's a totally valid approach to gaming. But I try and write, again, I write just as many rules as necessary to facilitate a certain type of story for players and then leave all sorts of blank space around it for people to take, click, and make it paranormal. Exactly. Like in the Mall Kids expansion, we actually did a spooky mall story of it because that was one of the most requested like takes on
cool.
Mall Kids that we ever heard of. But again, it was just enough rules to facilitate spooky. Is that aliens? Is that ghost? Is it body horror? Is it Scooby-Doo? Again, I'm not telling you what story to tell. I'm just giving you some tools to do those things. But yeah, so that really, I play on that line of like, I alienate players, I'm sure, because like some players like want to pick up a game and have more, right? They want to have more direction, which is why buying, these, I get that. I understand why somebody wants to buy 3, 4, 5 volumes and go, here's literally everything I need. But I don't have time to write all of these books. Like, so I think that, writing this book though, that is totally doable. Right. So I think there's also something there about like, energy, availability, like that should dictate what you make also.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Huh. That's really interesting. It's funny because going back to what you were saying about Weave, like when John first told me about like what Articles of the Arcana was all about, I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of like Weave, and so like the first place my brain went was like, oh yeah. And
how have I gotten to this point? How have I run a Kickstarter campaign for 25 days and worked on this game for 2 months beforehand and hired all these artists and not realize that this is not the first time that I've done tarot inspired.
Sometimes you're just too close to a thing to realize recognize the patterns.
Right.
Like
Just carving it. You're carving yourself out a niche here in like the
Apparently.
like indie game design sphere, where you're like, I make tarot inspired games.
Hmm. I so also, and there's we can also kind of like dive into, so this is wow, that's not going to focus at all, is it? This is Tapestry, which I know is a game, like that's a board game that came out almost exactly the same time that I started playtesting this. I played it with John. This is a mint tin game that has some cards in it and some tokens, and it's a storytelling engine that fits in there also. And again, it's very kind of tarot-ish inspired, where you're basically just interpreting prompts in context. So it's very much on brand for me. But I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention Spindle Wheel, which is a game. It's a game system. It's a game format. It's a series of small games. It's a deck of cards. Like, it's a lot of that. But it's this kind of like game system, call it what you want, made by Sasha Renault. It's on Kickstarter right now, I think, in like its final day or two. But again, like there's these cards that have kind of like a name and then like a two different like descriptions of that on either side, and you draw that card in a context at a certain point during the game and interpret it. And when I first found out about Spindle Wheel, probably about a year ago, there's like a Spindle Wheel Stories is a podcast that you can listen to where Sasha and a bunch of other players play the game. But like, again, I heard that, I read that, I experienced that, and I said, like, this is like, it's not tarot necessarily, but it's that kind of interpretive, vague nature where I could give you this game and I can take this game and I can give everybody this game and we would all do it completely differently. But at the same time, also, you hear people play Spindle Wheel on that podcast, and it's kind of wild how many times a card will come up and people will kind of react to it in a very similar way, which I think is also like, if you've ever read about tarot, like, you know, kind of studied it, that's kind of the notion, is that there's these kind of built-in universal feelings that just us as humans will see an image and go, I think this, I feel this, and I don't even know why. And there's just something so interesting about playing in that space to say, like, I should have written it down, but I feel like I was having a conversation with somebody, had this quote about like, I can write like 24 pages and make you think a thing. That's wildly powerful, right? Like that's such a wild statement, but like, isn't that what game designers do? Like, we're trying to get you to behave a certain way. It sounds super nefarious when you put it that way, but like,
it's funny because I remember you talking about this at the Mall Kids meetup at Gen Con. Like, I remember you talking about it with the I forget what it was called. I know I have a copy of it, but it's the one about like where like that it's basically just like a walk on the beach.
Oh yeah, my solo
Yeah.
beachcombing introspective game about picking up rocks and
Yep.
dealing with your personal problems.
Exactly.
Yeah. I came out of the gate swinging with that one. That was just like, I'm gonna write this game about picking up rocks and thinking about all your childhood baggage. Yeah, it's called Stories in the Sand. And so I live in the Pacific Northwest. I am a beach hiker. Like, I prefer to hike on beaches and just wander around and pick up rocks and stuff. So yeah, when you get out there and it's quiet and there's waves going and you pick up a rock and you're like, this rock reminds me, like the color reminds me of a piece of jewelry that my mom used to wear or whatever. Like, it just, sometimes I think that there are like, I feel that is something anybody could do, right? Like, you could go, you know, call it a beach, call it a field. You could go into the world and pick up a thing and think about it and then have feelings about that thing. Anybody could do that, but sometimes, like, that's what games are, right? It's about outlining an experience. I'm sort of giving you permission to take an hour and go be somewhere and look at rocks and think about your feelings. And, you know, this is like a wildly grandiose statement, but like, it's not entirely different than a therapist or a counselor. Like, it's just creating a framework of thinking about things, right? Like, feelings and emotions are complicated, and sometimes you don't know how you feel or why you feel that way. But maybe if I can distract you for a minute with a rock and then say, like, hey, put it in your pocket and think about why you're carrying it, then I have I have given you permission and guidelines on having a certain kind of experience that you may not have otherwise wanted to or been able to have. So I also kind of think I think very highly of game designers. I think that game designers have a lot of power. I think playing games is a way to get in touch with subconscious feelings and thoughts and really unpack stuff. And you know, I take that very seriously. I know I've had conversations with John about like, you know, the way I write these things have to be approachable. You know, these things have to be for everybody. They can't alienate or offend people because they're letting me into a very private part of their world to like let down their guard and play a game, which I mean in the, you know, year of chaos 2020, like anybody who takes a moment to sit down and play a game that's sacred time. You know,
Yeah.
and I recognize that and I want to, you know, live up to that.
Yeah. Um, I wanna take us a little bit in the direction of like speaking of like narrative games and game design. I said I wanted to kind of expand that out besides because the first question was to you specifically, Matthew, which is like how
Mhm.
you do it. But I kind of want to expand that out a little bit and talk a little bit about with and chat. You can feel free to weigh in on this too. But um, thoughts about like just sort of in general mechanics that you have come across yourself or that you have thought about yourself that serve that sort of narrative purpose. So
Mhm.
like basically I guess what I'm getting at is mechanics that um that make it easier to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I played D&D for a long time and then I took a break and then I got into board games and then that like slowly slid back into doing tabletop role-playing games. And that kind of like second like comeback of RPGs was kind of founded by Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I fell very deeply into that. If you've, I started a podcast called The Hard Move, which is I did a season of and is now currently being hosted by Sydney Icarus, who's doing a phenomenal job of season two. I love the direction season two went in. But that's kind of the thing where like everybody talks about Powered by the Apocalypse games as they're, you know, what considered to be narratively focused games. They're not super rules heavy, but at the same time, like we can fill an hour or 2 hours of a conversation talking about a rule, a mechanic. So they're there, and I think so. Kind of like doubling back on my original statement of like there kind of being a spectrum that puts mechanics and narrative at odds. I think that there are ones that facilitate that. And PBTA is an interesting version of that where you do a move, you roll some dice, there are mechanics that go in, there may be stats or whatever. But then like it doesn't tell you here's the bad outcome. It's pick one of these two bad outcomes,
Mm.
which again starts this cascade of why did I do the move? What was my role? What happened before I started doing this? Where's my character standing? Where, like, who does my character have bonds with and where are they? How did I fail? And then I have to pick these two options. And suddenly, again, like, never in the history of the world will that move ever fire or resolve in exactly the same way as it does. So I think that's like one simple answer there is like choice. Like,
Yeah.
at any point in time, you can have the crunchiest possible move. And if you, at the, you know, somewhere along the way, just put one little choice, you multiply like exponentially, you know, the narrative potential there because now suddenly you're allowing the player to not even make the choice, but just even think about the choice. Once you have them thinking about why one of those choices is better than the other, now you suddenly have them, you have them thinking about narrative.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's really cool. I like that. Um, I want to take us to chat real quick because I saw Gemini Lightning says I love flashbacks. Period. End of story. Next. Do you? That's I also like flashbacks a lot. Do you have you come across Gemini? Have you come across any like mechanics in any games that specifically go across do that or just sort of in general that you like that? Um,
Was it Blades? I think Blades in the Dark has a pretty explicit like flashback thing. And I've seen it in some other games. I'd love to hear what games Gemini's thinking of also. But I like this a lot because like there's some games that here's all of like you have to take a flask of oil. Well, how many flasks of oil? Did you take enough matches? And that to me is the absolute worst kind of game.
I
So
have never in my life remembered what's in an explorer's pack versus what's in a priest's pack in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Never in my life.
Nor do I think it's relevant that you do that. I don't think that's worth you taking the brain space for.
Almost never.
But so sometimes they do like just like they give you like it's just a pack and it's just like at any time you can take a thing out of the pack and hey, surprise, you had the thing that you needed, right? And I think flashbacks are similar. Like I can say, oh, I'm gonna oh, I know the code to that lock, right? I saw the word heist in here that Gemini put in, and it's just like, oh, I know the combination. Well, how do you know the combination? Flashback, I was at a party and I, cornered one of the guards and tricked them into giving me the right. And then you can do rolls and you can see how that flashback goes and everything. But like I've seen so many games get derailed because it's like, well, you didn't think of that. And it's just like, well, that's stupid. We're playing a game, right? We're making up a game. Let's just have a flashback to establish that. Or you could just not have a flashback and just be like, yep, you did that.
Yep.
Like,
absolutely. That's usually my approach too. Like it's just that my approach as the GM is just sort of like, I believe that you're competent enough in the specific role that you chose to play that you would remember to do something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and like in this same vein, Geekouts in chat said like I love any like story points or player intrusions or any kind of mechanic that encourages the players to play with the narrative. And I was like, I've been sitting here thinking like I love Cypher System player intrusions.
Yeah,
they're so much fun.
Yeah,
it's such a gift from the game designers to be like, here's a resource that you can use for a lot of things, but also if you just want to change the course of this scene with your GM's permission, you can do it. Spend this thing and decide what's happening, like, or what has happened.
Yeah, it's funny because that actually goes kind of hand in hand with what I was gonna say for my answer to this question, which is that, and which actually kind of goes back to something that Matthew said a little bit ago, which is this is gonna take a little bit of like relating topics to each other, but so I really enjoy one of my favorite mechanics in games, whether it's narrative or otherwise. I enjoy any game that has a system of barter between players and GM, where where the player's like, I want to do this thing, and the GM says, okay, cool, tell you what, if you do this, then I'll let you do that. And like I love that kind of give and take, not only because one, it makes it more like a conversation, but two, and this is kind of going to like what Matthew was saying earlier about Powered by the Apocalypse games, which I recently had a chance to play in Monster of the Week, which is the idea that kind of gives a sort of context for your actions, right? It gives a context for your actions in game in a way that just saying I do a thing doesn't, because in the end, like all of these games, they're like taking place in our minds, in our sort of collective agreed upon delusion, right? Like we and so they don't have the real world connection that actually doing things does, but adding in a way of making you stop and think about the relationship between actions and consequence of those actions, that's really cool. And that's what I feel like that kind of barter system does. It's forcing you to stop and think about, hey, I'm doing this thing, but what are the potential ramifications for me further down the line for doing this thing, in a way that I think is sometimes hard to grasp just from being told and just saying what you're doing. And sometimes somebody's GM style or the player's play style might not go along with that kind of thing, but it's just sort of a little like mechanical way of making you stop and consider that relationship. And so that's for me, that's my answer. Any system that has a sort of a give and take for when it comes to determining actions, I think that's super cool.
I think a lot of games, this is kind of the hard part, is you can't just like, You can't just have a 64-page book and page 1 says tell a story with your friends and then the 63 blank pages. But I mean, technically that's a game. Like that's like okay, that's way over here, right? That's on this end. That's on this end of the spectrum we talked about. But you have to keep backing that in enough, because that is like there's a middle ground where like players get overwhelmed with too much choice, players get overwhelmed with too much rules. So there's like a middle ground of trying to figure out, I mean, again, there's so many layers here about like, what do you want your game to accomplish? What kind of stories do you want it to tell? Who is like, you do have to define who it's for. You're not going to make a game for everybody. That's the way the world works, you know? But finding out how to create enough platform for them to jump off of and create nets for them to fall into. Apparently this is a circus metaphor now. You need to have those things. And then what they do up in the air, like they feel okay making some stuff up, you know, because they feel supported on both ends. Like they know that where they came from and where they're going, there's going to be some kind of direction there that then they can feel a little bit better. Because like improv is hard, right? Improv is not an easy thing to do. I feel like the game on Wednesday went really well, but I was pretty much stressed for 48 hours before that because I'm always terrified I'm not going to do a very good job of improving. But you trust the people that you're playing with. You trust like, and then like that rule system, you kind of put some trust in that it's going to catch you and it's going to launch you. And then hopefully you can kind of get over that fear of being silly, I guess. I don't know. I feel like as a game designer, I have now ruined playing games for myself because I'm detached. I'm not a player anymore. I am first and foremost a game designer. I am a writer. I am a even before that, just running the hard move, I was a game analyst. So I abstracted myself from playing, and I still try and make games for players. But I have to now put myself in a player's mindset instead of just be a player.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about improv is there are warm-ups you can do and exercises. That's basically, you know, I took quite a few classes in high school, and the rest it just happens without any thought. That's the idea, at least. Yeah, and speaking of rocks earlier, Matthew, it's funny you said that because I've been holding on to this little stone here the whole time. You mentioned that, I thought, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, we briefly discussed my pile of fidget toys, but here's some sea glass, and then it's probably not on camera, but like somewhere up in this ballpark, it's just a mason jar full of rocks and sea glass and stuff. I think. Yeah, like about a week ago, I spent like 3 hours just like walking along the beach in the Puget Sound, picking up rocks and bones and glass and shells and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, like this whole conversation has prompted me to think about like a teaching term that we use for like basically what we've been describing here, which is scaffolding, which is like where and there's all kinds of other like, you know, ed psych terms like the zone of proximal development and like keeping your learners within this certain area where they feel like challenged, but like they can reach the next rung on the ladder, right? So it's kind of like doing the same thing almost with game mechanics, and that you create a framework for people to feel comfortable doing that kind of story improv.
Well, okay, and that's interesting because I like this is actually very similar to kind of what I was thinking. Reading Karaoke Night had a thing earlier, and this is about Control, the video game, which I actually recently started playing. Actually, this is weird that it came up, but in Control, it's optional to find and collect letters, files, videos that help tell the story. You learn the story without them, but they really fill out the world both in lore and flavor. I know this exists in many games, but I've never been so drawn in as I have in Control. And like that seems like the kind of thing that it like what you're talking about, John, where it gives you this sort of framework. Like the story is there, but there's also like all these supports to like sit on basically that help you as the player of this game sort of pull in, right? Like it gives you context.
Yeah, because like if I see like the monkey bars above me and I like and they're close enough that I'm like, oh, I can jump to that, then like it's not you know, scary for me to like jump up and grab them. And I say that not just because I'm 6'2" and any set of monkey bars is within my reach, but you know, if it's like all a matter of just like making sure that you have kind of like the foothold that you need, and the security, kind of dumping, like almost jumping back to the circus metaphor, like the safety net to be able to like reach up and grab on and pull yourself up.
Yeah. Oh, and also Gemini. To go back to what Gemini said, there was another. He says there are some heist-centered mechanics where you are granted one thing that you just get to have, and when you get there, you describe how you got it, and then you roll for how well the planning went. So that's sort of a little bit like what you were saying before, Matthew, about the flashback mechanics and stuff like that. That's cool. I'd never actually considered take it, because usually like what we were talking about before, usually as a GM, like I often just sort of hand wave that kind of stuff where I'm like, I buy that you would have thought about this or something like that, but I never considered turning that into like an actual mechanic or even like an actual scene. That's something like that really has never occurred to me, because like I think on some level GMs, like not to the degree of like somebody who like actually designs a whole like a game, but like GMs kind of have to be game designers to a small degree, a little bit, right? Because like not every game is going to fit exactly what your players want to do, and you got to like figure out on the fly, like, all right, how am I going to make this work? And even if you're doing it without creating a new mechanic, right, without building a new thing, you're still trying to figure out, like, you still have to do that calculus of like, all right, what is something that is what's an analog in this game to what I want, and how do I maybe take that and repurpose it for something it was never intended for. So like on some level, GMs do like the most basic part of what like game design is, right, to some degree. So I think that like that is really interesting to me, the idea that game design has these different sort of like telescoping tiers of it, where like the smallest, most basic is how do I get from action input to like mechanical output kind of thing, right? And like how do I do that? And I think that's, I don't know, I consider that question a lot, probably it takes up a lot of my bandwidth when it comes to thinking about how to run games and stuff like that. But
Yeah, I mean, running games it's a stressful proposition. You know that your response, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for anybody else. I feel personally responsible for the happiness and well-being of other human beings, and that's rough. Like that is a mental load and an emotional burden that you kind of grapple with. So I think, yeah, like there's designing and writing a game for players, and there's designing and writing a game for game runners. Also, like that's why I think games that have separate sections for players and GMs appeal to me so much, because it is like it is separate. Like it is important to have some call outs there about how to run that game, and knowing. But that's the thing, is like you write a book, you put in all these rules, and then at the end of the day, like I wrote a book, I have rules. If you talk to me as a person, I will tell you to ignore any and all of them at any point you feel like, if it's a good idea for your game. So like, what am I even doing? Like, what am I selling to you? Why am I asking you to buy my game if I'm then going to turn around and in person tell you to ignore them? But that's really what it is. Like, going back to the Rose from our game on Wednesday that John had, it was, I'm going to use the word right, which is wrong, but I don't know what other word to use. It was completely within my right as a GM to say, that's not what that's for. It was doubly within my right as the creator of that content to say, that's not what I intended it to be. But that's stupid. Like that, what is that going to accomplish? Yep. I'm going to make John adhere to something I thought about 2 months ago when I looked at a tarot card and wrote out a couple words on a piece of paper. So what? Like, how on earth is that more important than John's happiness? The answer is it's not. It just empirically isn't.
Yeah.
And what happened, again, like John used that rose at least 2 or 3 times to great effect in our game that literally changed the course of the game. You know, I even made a call out on one of them. It was just like, John did a throwaway thing with the rose. And I said, if this was a campaign, that would come back at you 7 sessions from now.
Yeah.
It would. I know how it would. I already have it written in my head. And like, why would I deprive myself of that opportunity to write that story? Why would I deprive John of the thrill of finding a new way or an interesting way to affect the story? Why would I deprive the other players
See,
of getting what they like? They all loved it. Everybody was happy with it.
see,
There was dozens of people in chat that were happy with it.
and that right there, like that's so important. What you just said was like I'm gonna like go back over it because that is so important. And this is like core to my beliefs as somebody who like most frequently finds themselves interacting with games by running them, which is that when you say no to your players, hold on, I'm gonna do the emphasis thing. Okay, here we go. When you say no to your players, you are not only depriving them of cool stuff and happiness, but you are depriving yourself of it as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, there we go.
No, the example that I always kind of go back to is way back in the day, but it was probably like, I don't know, 3 years ago is when I like really started like writing stuff. And it was mostly, again, like I was writing supplemental content for D&D because that's what I was familiar and comfortable with at the time.
Mm.
And there was this room, they were in this mansion and they went to a room and I'm like, okay, I want them to get into the basement. And I drew a map and I put where the secret entrance to the basement was. And they never went to that space. And it dragged out and it was so dumb. And at any moment I could have said, they're like, I want an hors d'oeuvre. Oh, the butler has the password. I'm going to check out this light fixture. Oh, pull that. It opens the secret door. Oh, I want to like sneak through this safe. Oh, the safe is actually, it opens a door. And that's like, so in my mind now, the way I think about it is every single thing is the secret entrance, right? So don't design a secret entrance. Design a cool basement full of weird stuff and then let your players tell you where the secret entrance is. Let them tell you where it wants to be, because who cares if it's behind a portrait in like the entryway?
Yeah.
Is that the crux of your story? Is that going to be like the critical moment of storytelling that you have to adhere to? No, it's you want them to get in the basement, let them get in the basement. It doesn't matter how they get there.
That's a very important thing also, because I've been thinking about this recently in terms of like something that I've started doing is in systems that tend to be much more combat focused, I will say like I feel like every GM has like a thing that they naturally gravitate to, and then also a thing that they naturally move away from. For me, more often than not, the thing that I move away from is combat. I know it's cool and it has the greatest potential for like having cool moments for your players. Like they get to have that cool like Avengers moment or whatever, and that's great. And I do love that. I'm always here for any situation that can make my players feel really cool. Like here for that. But it's not always combat, and combat tends to more often than not be a slog. Like if you're playing in certain systems, or if you like me are not great at running combat in like an interesting way that doesn't just devolve into like, all right, roll dice, here's the result, right? Like, so one of the things I've started doing is essentially that, taking that exact concept but like applying it to combat, where if somebody does something extremely cool in combat and they just roll really well, like, I mean, they don't know how much HP the thing has, so I just say that's the one, that's what did it, that was really a cool moment, and like I think on some level it might appear like on a surface level that kind of thing might appear as being like, oh, that kind of cheapens the whole thing. But if you look deeper, I think sort of no player is going to have a great moment, a really cool thing happen that like causes them to kill or like win the fight or whatever and be like, oh man, I feel like I got robbed of a real victory. Like that's not how that works.
I mean, again, I've said it before, like if it's not abundantly clear at this point what my personal preference for games is, then maybe you haven't been paying attention. But like I don't make it like, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I have never met a person in my life who walked away from a game and said, man, when I added those two numbers together and it went over this other number, boy, how did I, like, no one in the history of the world has ever said that about a game. What they say is, I hung off the back of the, sorry, I'm going to use John's example tomorrow. I hung off the back of the ship and I extended my hand and I did this. Like, that's what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's kind of the interesting thing is like, I've heard that too. They're like, oh, well, if you lie about the dice rolls, if you fudge the numbers, that cheapens the experience. It's like, think of, okay, if someone out there said that as a player, if that's you, if you've said that, I want you to like seriously interrogate that. Please at me on Twitter if you want to. I will argue this to death. But think about what you want out of a game. If it's rolling dice and doing math, fine. Like, but I 99% sure that is not why you're playing this game. So
Yeah.
like, don't worry about that. Did I lie on Wednesday? Yes. All the time. But does that matter? Like, you know, John wanted to do a cool thing. I don't care what the dice. Okay, John actually did the dice roll. And I was like in the moment, in the middle of like checking his luck, and I'm like, oh wait, don't roll that. Don't roll that. That's terrible.
Like, there's no way you succeed.
There's no way you're rolling under a 4 on 2d6. Please don't do that. I want this to happen. And if like, I do want to like uphold that because like, again, we've all agreed to play this system.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to just like fly in the face of the system that everybody's already agreed to play. But at the same time, I'm not going to tell John, who has orchestrated this very cool moment hinging on a 2% dice roll, I'm not going to make that happen. I'm going to find a different way. But he rolled it anyway, and it was a 3, and it actually worked. He even put the camera on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, I rolled those 2 die, and then like my face is just like.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I will agree with that. Like, and I think, in an effort to be sort of like, punchy with my commentary, I sort of glossed over the important, like the caveats, right, to my statement, which is like, I'm never gonna like just do it for no reason, right? I'm never gonna just like fudge or lie for no reason. It's always to serve that purpose. And also, specifically when I do that, like in D&D as an example, right? This is, how many times has this happened in your D&D game where like the creature is like so close to dead and one good hit will get it there and the players just don't roll high enough, but then they're left with like 1, 2, maybe even 5 hit points, and then but they've done this cool thing and you're just like, that was such a cool thing. They could like, maybe their players sensed that it was like getting close to the end of combat and they wanted to do this like cool finisher and just the hopes that cool moment, right? And then it's got 1 hit point left.
Yep.
Like, that sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to take that moment away from a player by 1 or 2 hit points. It's totally arbitrary and completely unnecessary. Yeah. Like,
I mean, I don't run games often, but if anybody out there ever finds themselves in a game that I'm running and you want to get away with something that is basically mathematically impossible to do, just tell a really good story and I will tell you yes. Like, it's just going to be a given. Like, there's no way I'm just going to say no to that. But I've seen that, and that's why I'm gravitating away from games like D&D is, and again, this is not a qualitative generalization. It's just my personal preference. But the types of people who play and run D&D care very greatly about those numbers and those tables and those stats, and that's fine. But it ain't me anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't care about any of that stuff anymore. Like, it's. I like it. What I tell people is like, if you want to like get into writing supplemental content for D&D is really easy because there's just like decades of basis to do it on. It's a very rules heavy system, so you don't have to write any new rules. It's really easy to just like reskin it. But at the same time, I would very much encourage, like, go write for Troika instead, right? Go. There's plenty of systems, right? More Malls, More Kids has 4 pages on writing your own scenarios for it. Go write a Mall Kids scenario, put it on itch, sell it for $2 or $3 or $4, whatever, like, there's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't get so worried about these rules all the time.
I want to go back to something that I saw in chat a little while ago because I think it also has relevance to something that was mentioned before, which AsiaFit says, if you have to interact with all the lore/rules, it becomes a burden for the player. Lore/rules should be there when a player needs something, and it assists the player. And I thought that was interesting because I something that we said earlier about specifically about D&D and about like the, how many exactly how many ball bearings are in the explorer's bag, right? That kind of thing. And like that is totally unnecessary to track, not interesting. And the reason for it, because I actually have had there, I have had an experience in D&D. Freeman and I have had an experience in D&D where that's actually super engaging. But the reason it isn't most of the time is because it normally serves no purpose and has no relevance to how people are playing the game. But I will say at the beginning of Tomb of Annihilation, there's that whole exploring the jungle and like planning expeditions to go into the jungle and like finding ways of like of preparing to survive and whatever. And it honestly feels like playing Oregon Trail in D&D because there's a whole bunch of like resource management and stuff like that. I mean, you don't have to do it that way. I'm sure there are ways to play the beginning of Tomb of Annihilation without doing that. But it was really fun, surprisingly so. Our DM told us that we were going to be tracking weight, we were going to be tracking like the minutia of items and stuff like that. And at first I was like, I don't know about that. But when we were actually doing it, it was fun because it served a purpose. It actually served the game, and it was fun that way because it was just like it became a problem solving situation rather than a burden. And like I think that's really interesting.
And
It's because the mosquitoes would actually be an issue
Right.
in this environment.
So-
So tracking how much mosquito repellent you have is actually
Yeah.
pretty essential.
I mean, I believe you that you had a good time, but that sounds awful. It just
Well-
sounds so cumbersome to have
See,
to worry
here's the thing.
about that.
If I
Yeah.
was the one who was specifically doing the tracking, I probably would agree with you. But the thing is, we had somebody in the group who was like, "No, I love tracking this kind of stuff," and so it worked out that way.
Right. It's somebody's game.
Right.
Somebody likes the game of managing weight and counting
Yeah.
ball bearings and timing things in this fantasy world at a 5-to-1 rate. Like, I get that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I don't have time, right? Like I have a full-time
Right, yeah.
job, I have a family, I have a child, like I do Spanish class with my son on Fridays. Like I don't have the extra brain power to worry about how many ball bearings my character has on their sheet. Like it's just not
Fair.
something I
Yeah.
have any space for right
Honestly,
now.
for me, I like the tracking stuff. Oh God, no! Please do not make me do that. But like the problem-solving element, that's what I liked about it. Trying to figure out, okay, we only have this much gold, and we need this much insert useful thing here, whether it was the mosquito repellent or the like,
Resources.
right? We need this. Now, how do we get more gold or more resources? And then like all that like figuring out the problem solving element of it is what I really liked and enjoyed. It wasn't so much the actual tracking of it that I enjoyed, but yeah. So like, but one sort of is kind of goes into the other. Like you don't have the problem solving element if you don't have the tracking part of that. So like, yeah.
And then they come in at the end with the Tomb of Annihilation, the actual tomb, and all this that you've put into your character, it just gets
Listen, we don't need to
ripped-
talk about
ripped-
the actual
ripped-
tomb of
ripped
annihilation.
from you.
The module
Yeah,
we can
no.
talk about. The actual tomb, the less said about it, the better. But yeah, I do think that that's an important point though, which is the idea of mechanics. If they're, and I feel like D&D is probably one of the worst about this, having a bunch of mechanics that really serve no purpose. Like they're there, and maybe at one point they're there, they served a purpose, but now they're just sort of holdovers from earlier versions. And no, don't actually serve a purpose, and that's why there's so many rules within D&D that I feel like are often forgotten or just straight up ignored because they do not serve the way people are playing the game.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier is like you start with one piece of paper that says tell a story with your friends and then slowly add things to it as you need. Like it's already after 8 and I don't want to turn this into like a bash D&D party because like that is
Right.
that happens with me a lot. Like I have strong opinions about it, but at the same time, like I think it's good to interrogate. Like I don't like D&D. I interrogate why I don't like D&D,
Right.
because that helps me find what I do like. And what I do like is weird storytelling games. I like games where, I like games that lean towards one shots. I like games that tell stories. I like genre stuff. So, obviously like Mall Kids is very much this like 80s or 90s, like vague inspired teen dramedy type of thing. So again, I put rules in there to like try and like get you to go towards that area. Like if you want horror, like there are games. Sleepaway is one of my like all-time favorite games right now, written by Jay Dragon. It's a no dice, no masters slash belonging outside belonging game, depending on how you want to categorize it. But there's a lot of stuff in there about horror too, but it's like about kids at summer camp and you're playing kind of the counselors and how do we do horror in that way? And everything in the game supports that. Like every time you read something like this makes it creepy, this makes it tense, this makes it chaotic, this makes it unpredictable, and they all serve a purpose. You don't look at anything and go, well, why is this here?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I do think that that what you started out with is with that is really interesting as well. The idea that because it's something that like an way that I've sort of applied to other stuff as well that I enjoy, like just sort of various media consumption, which is don't stop at I don't like this, uh, but like go further and go why don't I like this? What specifically don't I like about this? Because on the one hand, yeah, it can help you find something that you do like. Um, but it can also be just sort of a way of just sort of being actively actively involved in the kind of things that you are engaging with, right? And like I think that's extremely important. It's sort of a mindfulness that you come to like anything, any specifically media that you engage with. Like it's thinking about it, thinking why don't I like this, and like that's asking why can be such a powerful question.
Metacognition, super important.
Yep. But yeah, Freeman, I forgot to. I know we sort of went to a different point but I know. Oh, I don't know if you got a chance to say anything about like narrative mechanics that you've come across that you've liked.
Oh, I absolutely thought of something maybe 10 minutes ago, so it's perfect timing, I think.
Perfect.
I believe recently, or at least within the past few years of role playing, I believe I've become very fond of the dream sequence in gaming, just because dreams are so cool in general in real life, and the way they can be used in games as a means of maybe doing a problem solving issue in the game, in real life, in the game, not in real life. Okay, well, I'm really confusing myself, but
this is an
as a
Inception kind of question,
Yeah.
isn't it?
kind of is as a means of problem solving an issue in the game. Maybe your character has an issue, or the team has a problem, and you have a dream sequence that is essentially you working something out, I think. And that's something that in real life I sometimes have done. If I can manage the sleep,
Right. Yeah.
then I try to
It's always the
focus on
trick.
an issue and a problem or an issue or something that I just can't think of in my conscious state. And I try to meditate on that before I go to sleep. And I try to dream out an issue. And I've also tried to do that with when I've lost something. I try to think about what it is, and then I go to sleep and I try to find it in my subconscious. Because oftentimes, especially this year, right? There's so many things that are on our minds constantly that it's hard to focus on the things that fall in the back, so that when you relax finally and you fall into that dreamscape, you can actually quite simply, not always, but quite simply, kind of go about and problem solve or find that thing you've lost.
That's really interesting because, like, I'd never thought about, at least not in the context of gaming, I'd never thought about dream sequences as like as solutions to problems. I mostly think about them as like framing devices, but I actually think that's really
Ooh,
cool. Like that's a really a cool idea of like the dream sequence being used as like a solution.
yeah, and I feel like a little bit of that happened in D&DR, Dungeons and Dorm
Yeah, a
Rooms.
little
I
bit.
feel like a little bit, and that's
Oh
where
yeah,
I
there
thought of
was
that.
there was that arc.
True.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Maybe I've thought about it, but like not really thought about thinking about it. Metacognition.
Sorry, I got really quiet there because I'm taking notes, because I think that's that's actually a really cool idea. Like the way I'm already thinking about it is having like a game that is serious and mundane, and then like that's the game, and then there's like the dream sequence, which is then it becomes really surreal and fantasy, and then there's a whole separate set of rules for playing in the dream versus playing not in the dream. And I can't remember the name of this movie. I don't think it was a particularly great movie. It was like, I think it was an entirely like basically female cast, where like she was in some kind of like mental institution.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Sucker Punch.
I'm talking about Sucker Punch. That's the name of this.
Yes.
Okay. To be exceptionally clear, many problems in this movie, tons of problems. I know this. You do not have to at me.
Oh,
I
yes.
know. I am aware. But
Absolutely.
in general concept, we have this like very serious, stern, even traumatic and awful, bleak landscape of like the game. And then like you go into the dreams, and now she's like in a schoolgirl outfit with a samurai sword killing Nazis. And it's just like, what are we doing now? Like, how did we get to this point? But like, yeah. And now again, like my brain is saying, okay, the bare minimum is a page of paper that says play Sucker Punch with your friends. And now we have to step back and make enough mechanics to get to what Freeman's describing about like there needs to, so what are the core concepts here? We're going to go into like live game design.
Yeah.
The core concepts are, we have to have these two game mechanics, or these two game types of gameplay, be distinct enough to matter. They can't just be the same. They can't have the same mechanics. If they have the same mechanics, then again, we're not doing anything. They don't serve anything.
It's the classic like writer frame narrative trap, where people are like frame narratives are really cool, and then they write a frame narrative and one story just doesn't matter and one super does, and so you don't care anytime.
I'm looking at you, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah. So like both halves have to be critical to telling the story that you want to
tell. King Killer Chronicles, Patrick Rothfuss. That's I don't read a ton. I'm a very slow reader, so this is why I don't actually read a lot. But I can't think of another book that has done that kind of like there's a third person story about the guy in the inn who is telling a story that then flips into first person or whatever, because it is him telling about him. And it's just like, oh, I see. He's gonna tell a story and I'm gonna care about that story. But then they kept coming back out to the real, the present, and it's just like, oh, but there is something happening out here. There is a timeline of events. There is action happening out here. I do care about this story. Like 90% of the story's in there though, but like there's still relevance out here.
I think I might have lifted that particular piece of advice from frame narratives from Patrick Rothfuss, like some panel talk that he did. So
I believe it. I think it's very well done. But yeah, I mean, we could design a game that is this mundane, serious, traumatic, awful game, and then you play this surrealist fantasy game when you dream, and that can like there's so many options there. It could be samurai swords and Nazis. It could be a roaring 20s jazz party. It could be like the dream can be anything, because that's like the point. And now you don't have to force people to believe that, right? With a lot of this, what we do, we have to get people to suspend their disbelief about like, okay, well, a dwarf is basically like it's a person and it's shorter. Okay, I can imagine that. But now it's like, okay, well, a goblin has big long ears. Well, okay, I can kind of imagine it. Well, this guy's got like 3 heads. Well, wait a minute, I don't know how that works. And this thing's just made of ooze. So what does that even mean? And like the further and further you get away from suspending disbelief, it gets harder. If I just tell you it's a dream, then you're like, okay, what do you have to argue against? It's a dream. Dreams are weird. Everybody knows that.
Instantly accepted.
Yeah.
Right? That's working smart. If you're having
I was
trouble
just about to say.
contextualizing your game, just say it's a dream.
I was
There
just
you
about
go,
to
you're
say
done.
that. I was just about to say that, but like from the design perspective, right? Because I'm like, talk about a framing device for your game, right? That gives you the option to just like let your players go free, because you don't have to know what anything looks like. You don't have to know you don't have to know any of that
Absolutely.
stuff.
You can change scene on a dime.
Yeah.
Like at any point you can just be
Right.
like, oh, you know how sometimes you're like sitting in your house making coffee in the morning and you're dreaming about doing that, and then all of the sudden you're like slicing up Nazis with a ninja sword. Like, yep, that's
Yep.
sometimes you're doing both at the same time. Like,
Sometimes your coffee cups turns into a bazooka, and that's totally normal. You don't have to interrogate that at all.
caffeinating legions of college students with it. Like,
Yeah. So no, okay, Geek Outs wants this game, so now I have to make this game. Not like I'm in the middle of a Kickstarter or anything, but
I do think
I think we had this.
Oh no, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we've had this happen at least twice in the Articles of the Arcana work Discord, where like something happens.
This
Matthew
loop
will
where
be
we
like,
come up with a new idea and have to stop it. John is a class A enabler for sure.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember what else. Let me open up my Google Docs here really fast, because I'm pretty sure I have two. Let's see. I wrote a scenario for a game that doesn't even exist yet.
Perfect.
I wrote. I started writing some Troika backgrounds, seasonal Troika backgrounds. So a series of 4 supplements that come out for a year every 3 months that are seasonally based. And I'm like, no, I don't have time to work on that right now. And then I dusted off Tapestry Rules, and I've been working on I started writing notes for a No Dice, No Masters game about kind of like mundane magic in turn of the century London. And I'm like, nope, got to put that on the shelf. Do not have the brain space to work on that at the moment.
I'm sitting here laughing because I'm the thing that has been becoming increasingly obvious to me is the like difference and yet similarity between like the way like the designer brain and the GM brain, right? Because Freeman said what he said and about dreams and stuff like that, and you went off into like, okay, how could we design a game around that? And me, I went the other direction. I'm like, all right, what game would I use to create this this scenario? And like,
yes, that is one benefit to being a game writer is it's easier for me to write a game than adapt a game. I think that's a topic that also is just like, if I go down that route, I'm just going to start bashing D&D again. Like, if you're a game runner, if you're a game player and you have this thought and you go, I want to play this game, please spend 30 minutes on the internet. You will find that game. You do not have to spend 4 days adapting D&D to play the game you want to play. I guarantee it 100%. Absolutely guarantee there is a game out there that is easily accessible and available to you that you can play exactly the story you want to play.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I'm not at liberty to say what game this is that I'm working on for SGD, but there's a game in there that applies to a very specific niche of people. And I'm like, you don't have to adapt D&D so that you can play out this story or like adapt something else. Somebody has gone and designed this very specific game just for the people who like this thing. And I love everything about that.
I fully agree with that. I think I was more commenting on the fact that like you went into going mechanics. How do I make them? And I'm like, what's the scenario?
Well,
I think that's really funny.
You could meditate on it and probably sleep on it.
Okay, Freeman.
Full circle.
Oh gosh, no, I love that.
I'll write a game. You'll write some supplemental content.
Perfect. There we go.
2021 Kickstarter for Dreamscape game. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at naming games. That's like my one downfall is like, how do I name a game?
Yeah. I feel you. That we at Rule of Lore, we name a lot of stuff all the time, and we're not always very good at it. So.
Not all names can be good.
No,
you just
you know
have
what?
to be okay with that.
They're not all going to be winners.
I wish we could find that list at the very beginning. The list of names.
Oh my God. As an archive lost, it is lost to history, lost to the whims of the internet. a list where we had like a master list of names for what we were going to call Rule of Lore, like before we were brainstorming, and it makes me so sad that we don't have that anymore.
I remember Kinda Gamey. I love that one.
I remember that one too.
Kinda gamey.
Kinda gamey.
I think that was how
I don't like the way those words come out of my mouth.
Me
I don't,
neither.
I don't like the way that feels.
It was not.
If I remember correctly, this was purely based on like a concept that Henry had for like what the logo might be, and it involved
true.
like a haunch of meat or something like that.
Yes.
It's a very Henry idea.
It really was. Also, the one that I remember very clearly from that list was fresh milk. I don't know why that was on there, but it was not my idea. I just remember it was on the list, and
Oh my god.
I don't think there was any thought behind it, behind just the
I suddenly
words.
feel so much better about my names now.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I'm not
I'm
the only
still-
one who struggles with names.
yeah.
I'm still very proud on the far opposite end of that spectrum. I'm still very proud of the time that we were trying to name a piece of Patreon content that we put out. And I was just like, what if we called it Tabletop Tool Chest? And then that was like the
There was
third
like
name that we
there's
tried.
a beat, and then we're just like, yep, that's the one. That's it. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
I just want to make a very quick call out here that for Geek Outs, it has been noted. It will go this thing's going in a Google Doc. It will get filed away. I'll get to it at some point, but I will have that in there. Gus wants to play this weird dream game.
Incredible. Yeah. I actually did have another question for you, Matthew, and this one's not so much on this is not a question on my behalf, but because I don't know if I've been vocal about it, but I've like very little interest in my own in my own doing any game designing of my own. Basically, I am fascinated by the concept of by other people doing it. I am fascinated as to how that process is done. Very little interest in doing it myself. So this is not a question on my behalf, but on behalf of anybody who may want to, what would you kind of got into it a little bit earlier, but then we kind of pivoted away. What would you say would be good places to start with that for anybody who is interested in getting into game designing?
Yeah, I mean, it's daunting. So again, like my journey was like writing supplemental content for other games, which I still do. I mean, that's literally what my project is right now, is a supplemental book for Troika. So, I mean, that's one answer, is find a game that you like, find a game that you really understand, find a game that you like, and try writing some content for that. I think to go along with that, but just in general, like start small. Like, I want to write D&D. Do not do that. I want to write a no dice, no masters game or a PBTA game. Don't do that. Like, do not pick up one of these big 300-page books and go, I'm going to do that for the first thing I do. You will be disappointed. You will be disheartened. I mean, maybe you knock it out. Maybe you got the great idea and you can do it. You're like, fine. I'm not going to dismiss that that's possible. But, you know, what I can tell you from personal experience is that, Stories in the Sand is a game that's like printed on a 5x7 sheet of paper on one side. I fold it in half and I give it to people at cons. It's a one-page game. Try and write a one-page game. I participated a couple times in the 200-word RPG challenge that gets put on every year. And that might be a bit extreme. 200 words is not a lot of words to write a game in. But like, write a 2-page game. Like, just give yourself some kind of weird arbitrary thing. Try and put a game in there. Mulkids is, I don't know, what's this book? Like 24 pages long? Of course, I didn't put page numbers in this. Like, this is like 24 pages long. Write a zine. You know, Kickstarter has done 2 years of Zine Quest, which is February-ish, where they do a whole month of make a tabletop role-playing adjacent zine, whether it's a game or a supplement or whatever, and put that out. Start there. Like, I think it's so critical not to get bogged down in making a book. I don't know if I've ever said this like out loud or on a stream or anything, but like the work that goes into a game is exponential for page count. Like, a 300-page book is not 300 times worse than a 1-page book. It's like 4,000 times worse. It's 30,000 times worse. Like, every page you add multiplies, because now you're worried about, you have too many pages. Now you need chapters and you need layout and you need art. And then all your rules have to play to all your other rules. And now you have to balance all these other things. And play tests can take 2 hours instead of 30 minutes. Now how you've multiplied your playtest time. So, I mean, like that's kind of like my big thing is start small. You want to finish something. Finishing something is huge. Being able to actually hold up a 20-page zine and say, I made this thing is hugely important when you're getting started. I think a caveat to that is like go on itch.io and search for like, just go to their browse and switch it over to physical games and just look at all the weird stuff that's going on there. There's tons of 1-page games. There's tons of 4-page games. There's tons of rules light games. And people buy them. People pay literal, hard-earned money for these things. So like games are valid whether or not they're paid for, but like, if that's what motivates you, like, validation, you do not have to make these books. These books are nice. Maybe someday you will get here. Will I ever get here? Maybe. Like I said, I have like a No Dice, No Masters game in the back of my head. So maybe in 2 years I have an actual like book. The book I'm trying to make is like that Troika's over here somewhere. I don't know. Troika's right there. Like that's my next thing. It's 72 pages. And that seems like a wild investment to me.